Under President Herbert Hoover, America slid into the Great Depression, a crisis that swept across the entire globe. As confidence in the nation collapsed and people began to lose hope, a new leader stepped onto the stage. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, ranked by many historians as one of the three greatest U.S. presidents, alongside George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. On March 4, 1933, FDR delivered his inaugural address. His most famous line reassured the American people, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." He was talking about that vague, irrational, paralyzing fear that could destroy every effort to recover. The very next day, March 5th, he declared a nationwide bank holiday, shutting down all banks and halting gold exports and foreign exchange transactions. 4 days later, on March 9th, Congress passed the Emergency Banking Act, granting full legal authority to the president's measures. On March 10th, Roosevelt called for deep cuts in federal spending. On March 11th, he announced that most banks would soon reopen. Then, on the evening of March 12th, FDR's voice reached millions of Americans through the radio in his first fireside chat. He explained in plain, reassuring language how the banks would reopen and how ordinary people should respond. By March 13th, banks began reopening. Within just 10 days, the Roosevelt administration's swift actions and unshakable confidence had begun to calm public fear. The following months turned Washington into a hive of activity. Civil servants, bankers, social workers, and technical experts pushed themselves to the limit to roll out a sweeping set of recovery programs, what came to be known as Roosevelt's first 100 days. Here's what that one-two punch looked like. First punch, abandoning the gold standard. Roosevelt took the dollar off gold to stop deflation and expand the money supply. Without gold as a constraint, the government could issue more currency. Contrary to fears, runaway inflation didn't happen. Instead, devaluation made American exports more competitive, lifted farm prices, and encouraged overseas investors to trade gold for dollars, bringing gold back into U.S. reserves. Second punch, farm subsidies. Through the Agricultural Adjustment Administration (AA), the government paid farmers to cut production in order to raise crop prices. That meant plowing under cotton, reducing acreage, and even slaughtering piglets. To cover these subsidies, the government imposed a processing tax on food companies, which was ultimately passed on to urban consumers. It was controversial. Millions were hungry, yet crops and livestock were being destroyed to prop up prices. Third punch, putting young men to work. The Civilian Conservation Corps (CCC) sent over 250,000 young men into forests, mountains, and rural areas to build roads, plant trees, and improve national parks. Fourth punch, direct relief. Unlike Hoover, who resisted direct federal aid, Roosevelt wasn't afraid to provide relief payments to the unemployed. Fifth punch, public works projects. Through the Tennessee Valley Authority (TVA), the government built dams, generated cheap electricity, and curbed the power of private utility monopolies. For many rural families, this was the first time they had electricity at all. Sixth punch, mortgage relief. New federal agencies refinanced farm and home mortgages, lowering interest rates and preventing foreclosures. Seventh punch, securities reform. The Securities Act of 1933 required companies issuing stocks and bonds to fully disclose financial information, laying the foundation for modern securities regulation. Eighth punch, the National Recovery Administration (NRA). The NRA tried to shorten work hours, set minimum wages, and encourage industry-wide cooperation to stabilize the economy. For a while, Saturday became a standard day off, and workers gained more leisure time. But employers often gamed the system, raising some wages to the legal minimum while cutting others. Rising wages couldn't keep pace with rising prices, and the NRA soon drew criticism. By June 1933, Roosevelt signed the National Industrial Recovery Act, closing out his 100 days. Industrial production quickly rebounded. By July, it had jumped back to the level of 1929. But by late that year, recovery faltered again. Production fell, stock markets grew volatile, and unemployment remained painfully high. To combat this, Roosevelt kept experimenting. In 1934, he created the Civil Works Administration (CWA), hiring for million people to build and repair public infrastructure. Though short-lived, it showed the potential of work relief. In 1935, it was replaced by the Works Progress Administration (WPA), which launched massive projects: highways, dams, bridges, schools, hospitals, even public art. Still, critics pointed out that these programs were enormously expensive, and their costs would ultimately fall on taxpayers. Wealthy Americans, once hopeful, began to see Roosevelt as a threat to them. He looked less like a savior and more like a radical. They accused him of being a socialist or even a dictator. By 1936, as the next presidential election approached, Roosevelt's New Deal was under attack from both the courts and big business. Yet he remained the champion of the unemployed, the farmers, and the working poor. His opponent, Kansas Governor Alf Lander, had strong backing from conservatives. The country was still mired in depression, but Roosevelt was ready to face the voters once again. How did a president in a wheelchair, accused of being a tyrant by his enemies, manage to win re-election by a landslide? That's the story we'll dive into next. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this, don't forget to follow, like, and share.